You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Well, good evening. It's another Thursday evening, and it's time for The Voice of Reason with Michael Murphy, your host. Once again, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you for joining us in this podcast. I appreciate the time that you invest in this. It takes me a little bit of time to put things together, and of course, to record it. So, as long as we all can enjoy what we do, me doing it and you listening, then it all works, doesn't it? Oh my! It is it's a scorcher outside here at my place. It was pretty hot last week, and it's I think 103 today. I'm ready. I'm already ready for fall. But I got quite a bit done today, and so now it's time to take a break from the manual aspect of my life and get down to the cerebral part. So we're going to talk about a few things. I'm always listening to talk radio and sort of following what's going on in the world, but I tend to listen to maybe a little bit different things and try to kind of get a different take on stuff. Maybe things that really aren't so much in the news, and sometimes things aren't in the news are maybe a little more important. We tend to get ourselves kind of caught up with stuff, and of course there's a lot of sensationalism and all like that, and it sort of dominoes into an effect that we listen to what we're told is important. So when you watch the news, they show you what they want you to hear, and whether they leave things out or add a little thing or it's 100% right or 100% wrong, it doesn't really matter, and they don't really lose anything one way or the other. I've watched this situation as we go through. We've been going really through the last couple of years. Once this last presidential campaign sort of was kicking off, and not everybody had thrown their hat in the ring, so to speak, but things started getting a little bit nasty, and I've said this before. I thought it would maybe get better after the election, or certainly maybe after the primary was over. And when that didn't happen, I thought, well, maybe when the election's over. And when that didn't happen, I thought, well, maybe when the first 100 days is over. And then that hasn't happened. And I've decided that it's not going to happen. Now, I know I'm kind of a slow learner. But I don't know if you've heard of something called the broken window theory. And something I think Rudy Giuliani is the one that kind of made it somewhat known. It's the idea that if you walk through a nice neighborhood, you have a tendency to appreciate the nice neighborhood, and you wouldn't do anything to mess it up. However, if you're walking along through a neighborhood where the buildings are pretty much dilapidated and vacant, and there's broken windows, the tendency, if you saw a rock standing on laying there on the ground, to pick up a rock and throw it at one of the windows that maybe wasn't broken, is something that people might do and tend to do when they're in that neighborhood, even though it's something they normally would not do and it's somewhat out of their character. And I see that with social media. I know people who it's not their character to be rude. It's not their character to be in your face when you're in person with them. You can go out to dinner with them. You can sit around and play cards with them. Whatever. And they're decent people, and they don't get in your face, and they won't call you names, and they won't get up and stomp out and leave if you don't agree with 100% of what they say. And yet, on social media, that's exactly how they behave. And they've been living in this broken window world. And when other people do it, they have a tendency to do it as well. I saw myself getting into that as well a number of months ago, and I decided to completely disengage from it. I know people who have left Facebook because of this, and it's for their own good. And I appreciate the fact that they can see that they've got a problem. It's like an alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever you've got going on in your life that you're hooked on. If you see that it's not a positive influence in your life and you want to get rid of it, the best way to do it is to cold turkey and get away from it. And so I know people, like I said, who have just left Facebook. I know people who have never gotten into Facebook because of what's there. And I can appreciate that as well. We are in a situation where, and I talked about this and have written about it recently, how our nation is really devolving into something that is not very pretty. There is money in this hatred. We all know the sites. I'm not going to name any sites, but we all know the sites. Now, some of us maybe know them, and some of them maybe we don't. But that's the way it is. You have to do your due diligence and figure out who's right and who's wrong, and who's throwing hate and lies, and who's throwing stuff up. You've heard the old adage: you throw something up against the wall to see if it'll stick, or run it up the flagpole to see if anybody salutes it. That's what a lot of these sites do. These sites just throw stuff out there to get people riled up. And you know what? They really don't care what you think. And they don't care if you agree with them or not. Because there's money in what they're doing. The reason there's money in it is that if you see that headline and you click on it, it doesn't matter if you only spent 10 seconds on there. You clicked on it. And so they're able to go to their advertisers and say, hey, look at this. We have 100,000 or 400,000 or whatever like that visits to our website every day or every hour or however they want to measure it. And these articles got all these clicks and things like that. And so that adds up and that translates into money. It's time that we not be putting money in these people's pockets. And I'm not sure how we do it other than one person at a time, waking up and deciding, I'm not going to play that game, and I'm not going to do that. I was talking the other day with some people, and they said, well, I try to convince my friends, they've got some bizarre ideas or whatever like that. I try to convince them that they're wrong and show them the right way and everything. And I said, well, it's very difficult to try to get somebody to understand and believe something that they don't want to believe. And so I said, I thought of the parable. It wasn't a parable, actually, when Jesus was talking to his disciples. He told them when they went into a place, if they were not received, that they were to shake the dust off their feet as they left. And that was a symbol, of course, is, hey, I'm leaving and I'm taking nothing from here. I'm not even going to leave the dust on the bottom of my feet. And the bottom line is not everybody's going to listen. And I was also reminded of the parable of the sower. Jesus told when he went out, when he says the sower went out to sow. Now, understand, this is not modern day. We've got drills and expensive, nice equipment, and you prepare the soil, and all the seed goes exactly where you want it. Now, some of the soil is a little bit better than others. Maybe the fertilizer hits a little bit better in places, but it pretty well all goes in the soil. But now understand, when Jesus was talking, a guy went around with a bag hanging around his neck and took the seed out of the bag and scattered it out with his hand. And the idea was that some of that seed fell on the path, some of it fell among the rocks, some of it fell in an area that hadn't been plowed and had thorns and weeds and stuff growing in it, and some of it fell on good ground. The bottom line is the seed goes where the seed goes. And it's up to the receiver to determine whether it grows or not and whether it's fruitful or not. You cannot make a seed produce in rocky ground or on top of the path or in the middle of the thorns, because the thorns will just choke it out. It won't get enough moisture, it won't get enough light. Well, the truth is the same way. When we tell the truth, and I don't mean our version of the truth, I mean the truth. If we're just going to give the facts, like Dragnet, just the facts, man, just the facts. If we're going to tell the truth, well, the truth is either going to be believed or it's not. And we can try all we want to try to convince people to believe it and to go along with us, but all we'll do is be knocking ourselves in the head and beating our head against the wall, trying to get people to understand it. Until they are willing to open their eyes and pay attention, they're not going to believe it. Anyway, that's my rant for the day, or one of the rants for the day. There was a thing there was a disaster in London the other day. I didn't see a lot about it in the news, but it was and probably because it wasn't terror related and all like that. But there was a high-rise apartment building that caught fire, and the external part of the building was on fire, and people couldn't get out. And even, like 24, 36 hours after the fire, there were still over 100 people not accounted for. They didn't know where if they were trapped inside somewhere and had been unable to get out, or if maybe they just hadn't been home and hadn't checked in, or they really didn't know yet. But the bottom line is, as they began investigating this situation, the siding, whatever it was they used on the outside of these buildings, was fairly flammable, and so it trapped people inside. The windows, you couldn't go out a window because the outside of the building was on fire. Well, London has 600 of these high-rise apartment buildings. You pause to think of that. The number 600 doesn't sound that big, okay? But when you're looking at a city, 600. Now, let's say each building has 1,000 people in it, and I think that's fairly reasonable. You're talking 600,000 people are at risk. Okay, well, I talked last week about the fact that we can't go through life without risk, but we do try to minimize the risk as much as we can. But the mayor of London is now talking about this being a housing crisis, because now these apartments are potentially death traps if they are caught fire. Now, he believes there are a lot of people in London. I say a lot. I don't know how many, but because of the way the taxes are in London and in Europe and Great Britain, real estate is a good place to put your money. And that's true in the United States as well. But anyway, real estate is a good place to put your money. So a lot of people that have any money, rather than having it sitting in a bank somewhere or in some kind of stock market or whatever, have bought property. And in many cases, this property is empty. Well, the mayor has decided, there's a lot of these apartments and condos and houses and stuff scattered around the country, and scattered especially around London, that are empty. And he says, in a crisis, we should be able to seize this property and just put people in it. Now, I want you to stop and think for a second. It doesn't really matter whether you've got money in a bank or whether you've got money in a piece of property. When the government comes along and seizes it, they have taken your property. And, okay, this is in Great Britain. That's not here. So everything's cool. We don't have to worry about it. Except, there's always the but, right? We've got situations going on here in this country that is not due to it's not due to construction, and it's not due to danger of fire. But Illinois recently, and I talked about this, I did a video today, and Illinois has got a kind of a bad situation with their public pensions. They passed legislation here some time ago trying to change what was paid out in the pensions. And of course the pensioners, they go, well, that's not right. And so they took it to court. And the court agreed. The court said, you know what, you made these promises, and so you've got to fulfill your promise. So now the state is liable for paying all these pensions, paying them out just exactly as they were promised. The problem is that the pension payments right now equals 100% of the tax revenue of the state of Illinois. So when you think about that, the fact that now I'm sure that they have been required by law to put some money, away, but that money's been put largely in the stock market and things like that. And sometimes it's not very easily accessible. And so they're in a situation now where they are having to scramble around and figure out what they're going to do. How long do you think it'd be before, if things start falling apart, they start seizing property or trying to? You think about that. They're already talking about the fact that, well, there's wealthy people. They've got plenty of money, and maybe we can just take some of their assets and take care of this. There's been talk of busting Illinois up into 5 sections and kind of parceling it off to spread this this misery out among 5 of the adjacent states. Imagine being Missouri and saying you're going to get stuck with East St. Louis or Wisconsin, and you're going to get stuck with Chicago. There's some crazy things, some crazy thoughts going on around here, and that's not going to happen, obviously. But we have to understand that when it gets to be a crisis, the state says, well, don't worry, we're not going to go bankrupt because it's illegal for us to go bankrupt. We can't go bankrupt. But if you can't pay all your bills, if you can't keep the highways up, if you can't make your welfare payments, if you can't make your Medicaid payments, things like that, then people are going to start fussing and raising Cain. And so we find ourselves in maybe a very difficult situation. I'm going to take a short break here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. But it's the sort of thing that I think you need to be paying attention to, because you're not hearing about this in the news. But this could be something that could be really a big deal in the not-too-distant future. Okay, thanks for staying with us. I appreciate it. Once again, I really do appreciate the fact that you guys have taken the time to listen to what I have to say. When I left there before the break, we were talking about this situation in London and then also then in Chicago, and with the pensions and all. And I want to go back and talk about something. I've wanted to write an article on this. I've been really busy. I had a lot of other stuff going on, and I'd like to write an article on this, but understand, it takes a long time to write an article. By the time you research it, by the time you detail things, write the article, put references in that you need to, because I want it to be factual. I don't want you to just believe it just because I said it. And if it's my opinion, I'll tell you it's my opinion. But the bottom line is we've got situations here where the government has really put us in a very, very difficult situation. And when I say the government's put us, we've allowed the government to put us in this situation. I wanted to go back here a little ways, back in the early part of the 20th century. There's a man named Charles Ponzi. Now, when I say Charles Ponzi, you go, oh, Ponzi scheme. Yeah, and that's exactly right. The Ponzi scheme was named after Charles Ponzi. And what did Charles Ponzi do wrong? Well, actually, when he was doing it, it wasn't illegal. And, of course, in recent years, we've got Bernie Madoff, who was doing something very similar. The bottom line is what what Charles Ponzi did, and Bernie Madoff as well, is he would get investors to come in and give him money to invest, and then he would turn around, and the people, as they wanted to get out or wanted to get the interest or whatever off their money, their investment, then he would take money that was coming in from the new people and give it to the people on the back end. So he never really was investing the money. He just sort of was a revolving door, and he took in more than he put out, and he ended up with a lot of money. And he became very wealthy, just like Bernie Madoff did. And the thing is, of course, then they went in, they passed laws, and they made that illegal. You can't do that. I looked at this and I said, well, the problem is the government doesn't like competition. Now, when you think about the fact of what is Social Security, every month, every week, every 2 weeks, whatever it is you get paid, does anybody even really look at their pay stub anymore? Do you look at your pay stub and see how much is taken out? Or has that just gotten to be old hat and you know that I grossed $1,000 and I know I'm only taking home $690 and the rest of it is going somewhere, but I don't really look at it. I'm just used to it. Well, I encourage you to go back and look and see exactly where all that money's going and who it's going to, because you got Medicare tax, you got Social Security tax, you got your state and local income taxes, and you got your federal income tax all coming out of there. What I want to look at specifically is, of course, is the Medicare tax and the Social Security tax. Is that not just a Ponzi scheme? Because that money is not going in there. It's not like an insurance payment. It's not like you're making a premium payment. It's not an account. That money doesn't go into an account with your name on it. Would that were true, because then it would actually work pretty well. No, it's a Ponzi scheme. And the people that are working today, because there is no account, there's no lockbox. I used to talk about Social Security lockbox. There's no such thing. That money comes in. That went away, I think, under Lyndon Johnson when they got rid of the lockbox. Okay, so it's been gone for a long time. So when they take the money out of your check, the people who have retired who get a Social Security check get that money. That's just pure and simple. That's just the way it is. So the bottom line is then someday when you retire, you've got to hope there's enough people working to pay into it so that you'll get your check. And, of course, what they count on is there's a certain number of people who die and never collect anything. Well, that money's just all thrown in the pot. So you get a situation here where you've got that is nothing less than a Ponzi scheme. Medicare is the same way. Medicare is the exact same thing. Medicare, that they take that money out, they put it in there, and then as people who are already on Medicare, they go to the hospital, they go to the doctor, that money's taken out, and those bills are paid. The thing that they do there, of course, they also control how much is paid out Social Security, but they do the same thing with Medicare and Medicaid. They determine what they are willing to pay for services, and that is based on the fact of you've got so much coming in, and they know so much is going to go out, and they've got to restrict the payments so that they don't exceed what comes in. Nothing more than a Ponzi scheme. What about the lotteries? The state runs lotteries. Isn't that just gambling? Now you can't start your own lottery. That's illegal. You can't open up your own casino. That's illegal. You got to have certain squares. You got to be Native American. I've always thought the Indians were pretty smart. They held on long enough that they came back and they got the white man, right. Oh, it's a mess. And like I said, I don't think the government does not like the competition. So we're in a situation here where the government mandates that we behave in a certain way, and that they do not hold themselves to the same standard. And then, of course, when you get the courts involved, when you look at the situation, say like in Illinois, where they say, you know what, we really made promises we should never have made. And that's exactly what it amounts to. When you look at these pensions and things like that were set up, and I don't care whether it's a public pension or whether it's a corporate pension. I flew for United, and part of why I went to work for United was there was a pension, and I was young and naive, and I thought that's a good thing. Well, as I was working, I began to realize, you know what, that's not really a good thing. The best retirement is one that you put in for yourself, because that one's solid. That's the one what you know is there. And ultimately, after 9/11, when United went through their bankruptcy, one of the things they did was they got rid of their retirement plan. And so everybody that was working there at the time that had everything going towards that retirement and was planning on that retirement, that went away. And people who were actually already retired lost theirs. So I think it's interesting that Illinois, the courts have said, no, you can't do that. But then in other cases, it was done. And not only was it, the courts in Illinois wouldn't let them cut it. Well, in my situation, it absolutely went away. It wasn't just cut. It was cut. It was cut 100%, 100% cut. So it's just the way it is. The courts have come in and said now Illinois cannot cut these back to where it makes it livable. You've got to pay it all. Well, I don't know how they're going to do it. I honestly don't know how they're going to do it. And some way or another, it's going to come out. Like I said, it's going to come out where it's your fault and it's my fault, and we're going to have to pay for it. The next one, of course, on the cusp is California. California, I think I read that there are more people receiving benefits in California than are working. That cannot last. And then you add on top of that, we well know some of the classic stories from California, where you've got these places where the city manager, whatever like that's making $600,000, $800,000 a year, and then they retire and keep making that money. Well, how many people does it take that are working to pay taxes to pay for that sort of a pension? That just doesn't work, and the state's going to be the state's already in serious trouble, and who's going to pay for that? The bottom line is we've got an economic nightmare hanging over us right now, and we don't know it. We're gonna take a look here in a little bit. It's about time for another break, pay some bills. But when we come back from the break, I want you to understand that we're going to take a look at some things that are kind of hanging out there. It's going to be some dangerous and some difficult times coming, and I don't know how else to put it, but we'll be back shortly.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Okay, we're back, and I appreciate it once again. I appreciate the fact that you're here. We've got like I said, we've got financial situations. I've talked in the past, of course, about the federal debt, the deficit, and a lot of people don't even understand the difference of those two. The deficit is every year we spend more than we take in. That's the shortfall is the deficit. The debt is the total of all those deficits over the years, and we are right around $20 trillion right now. When you've got a budget that's around $4 trillion, and people will sometimes look at it like that and say, well, my house, I make $100,000 a year, and I live in a $400,000 house, and so roughly I've got 4 times my annual income tied up in my house. And that's reasonable because I pay it out over 30 years and it's okay. Well, the bottom line is you are going to pay it off. We do nothing towards paying off our debt, national debt. And we do have probably close to a $4 trillion annual expenditure. We don't take in $4 trillion. And so the debt keeps getting bigger. And it's just a nightmare. And it's little wonder that we cannot keep our own personal and state fiscal lives in order. Because, I got confused there, backed up. It's little wonder that the federal government can't keep its house in order when none of the states do. Very few local governments do, and most houses don't. And I think it's something that we need to. Once again, I like to look at the root of the problem, and as we look at this national situation that where we're kind of hanging on the edge, I think we need to look at ourselves. And we expect the federal government to do something. We expect the state government to do something that we ourselves will not do. We've got a situation where I was reading the other day, 40% of American households, I'm reading this, 47% of American households, according to an annual report by the Federal Reserve, could not afford a $400 emergency. Now, I want you to stop back and think of that, and you might be in that situation yourself. If an unexpected emergency comes up to where you had to come up with $400, could you pay it? Well, nearly half the country cannot. The only way they could pay it is to put it on a credit card and then pay it out over time, or borrow the money, or go to a pawn shop. It says more families are turning to non-bank, high-interest loans, pawn shops, and rent-to-own services for emergencies and basic expenses. The average household American household debt is $5,700. Now, we're talking credit cards. We're not talking, homes and cars and things like that. The average for those who carry balances is $16,048. Total outstanding U.S. consumer debt is $3.4 trillion. Total revolving debt, $929 billion. 38.1% of all households carry some sort of credit card debt. So just about 4 out of 10 are carrying debt. I've got a friend who was speaking to a fellow worker here recently, and they asked him, said, well, do you have credit cards? And my friend said, well, we have a credit card, we have a debit card. Well, do you carry balances on that? And she says, well, no, of course, the debit card, it just comes out of your account, and the credit card, we pay, if we have to put anything on the credit card, we pay for it at the end of the month when we get the bill. She says, well, how do you do that? My friend says, well, what do you mean, how do I do that? She says, well, we have 8 credit cards, and they're all maxed out, and we're making the minimum payment. How do you do it? Well, you do it by living within your means. And that's the bottom line, and we don't know how to do that. And we don't know how to do it on a state level. My state just recently passed a tax increase. They did 0 spending cuts. They had a shortfall and they had problems, and they stayed in longer and extra session and all like that, and they finally rammed through a tax increase. And the bottom line is none of them were willing to cut anything, because somebody's always got a pet project, and so the only way you can get anything passed is by keeping those pet projects going. Because if you try to cut a pet project, you're going to lose a vote, and so that's the way things go, and it's going to tear up our country if we don't get a handle on it. Our economy is not. If we listen to our if we listen to the media and we listen to the pundits and all like that, they talk about, in most cases, they talk about how good things are. Of course, it flip-flopped around. Before the election, everything was, if you're on of a Democrat persuasion, everything was rosy, and if you're a Republican, then everything was dismal. And after the election, it flip-flopped. Suddenly, everything looks terrible from the Democrat point of view, and everything looks wonderful from a Republican point of view. And the bottom line is they've both got rose-colored glasses, and they're not looking at what's really there. I'm sorry. Donald Trump's done some good things. He's done some bad things, but he is not the savior, and he cannot save this country. This country will only be saved by us. And if we're not willing to do the work, we can't expect somebody else to do it. It's a situation where we've got, I'm looking for my notes here. We've got, our economy relies on this thing that they created back in 1913 called the Fed. The Fed's got a terrible track record, and I've talked about this in the past. It's primarily made up of academics, people who have never done anything in their life. All they do is they come around, they come up with ideas. And if that idea doesn't work, well, then they try to come up with another idea. What we need in the Fed, I listened to, I read a book here recently called Fed Up, and the woman who wrote it, and I should have had her name handy here, and I don't. It's Danielle something Booth, I believe. She worked for the Fed, and she believes the Fed is necessary, and that may be true. You know, in this day and age, something like the Fed may be necessary, but her take on it is the fact it's full of academics, and it needs to be full of people who have actually run businesses and done things rather than just dreamed about it and thought about it. And that certainly would be a huge step forward. The Fed kept rates artificially low for such a long time because they were trying to do something to try to keep the market going, or to keep the economy going. Well, now they've kept it down for so long. Now they're sort of forced to raise it because they've got situations where you could have a blowout with relation to inflation. So they've got to do something to try to keep that in check. They'll tell you that there is no inflation, but those of us who shop know there's inflation. But the way they measure inflation is done by, they've got to look at like things. In other words, I've got a can of green beans that sold for so much 6 months ago, and now it's selling for the same thing, or it's selling for like a penny more, and so therefore inflation is low. What they don't look at is that the fact that the can of green beans went from 16 ounces to 15 ounces. Well, that was a pretty good jump in price when you look at it from that standpoint. And we see things like that. Cars have gone up incredibly. I haven't shopped for a new car for a long time. Bought my wife a new car in 2014, but we knew what we wanted. I didn't really shop around. I didn't look at other cars. I wanted to get her a diesel Jetta wagon, and that's what we got. We shopped around. We got the best deal we could, and we bought it. And that was the way it was. I've got my pickup is a 2000 F250 diesel. I looked the other day. I was happened to be on a car lot, and so I wandered by and looked at a new 2017 diesel pickup, and I was just like flabbergasted. It was like $68,000. $68,000 for a truck. And so then I get to kind of checking around, and it's not that uncommon. The $45,000 to $55,000 car is not uncommon. And I'm not. That's a shock to me. It's not a shock to you, I'm sure. But the bottom line is as the price of these cars have gone up, what have they had to do? They've had to get creative in selling them. Well, people don't buy a car by paying cash. You don't go out. You don't come up. You write a check for $45,000 for your car or whatever. You make payments. Well, you can only make so much of a payment. I've got in my budget, I can only make $450 or whatever it amounts to for a payment. So when that $450, when that number starts getting too high, what does a creative lender do? They add a year or two to the note. They get that payment down. So now we're buying cars with, used to 24 months. I remember when I was young, 24 months was a car loan. And then they went to 36. Then they went to 48. And then they went to 60. And 60 was a long time. That was kind of unusual, but they had them. Well, now 72 and 84 months is not uncommon for a car loan. Well, if anybody was to stop and think about it, what that does, you buy a car, $65,000 car, $60,000 car, whatever like that, and you drive it off the lot, it's suddenly probably lost 10% just driving it off the lot. But now you drive it for 3 years. Now I live in the country. We put a lot of miles on a car. That's part of why we drive diesels, because we put a lot of miles on cars, and we want the cars to be able to last. However, the average person probably drives closer to 10,000 miles a year. So you drive 10, maybe 15,000 miles a year. You take your car. You've had your car 3 years old. You've got 30, 40,000 miles on it. Well, now what's that car worth? You paid $60,000 for that car. That car is maybe only worth half that. But you had it on a 72-month note or an 84-month note, and you still owe $40,000 on it. You're upside down in your car. Well, what put us in our problem back in 2008? It was people buying houses they couldn't afford, that had no equity in the house, and then when things got tough, they couldn't make the payments. Well, we're seeing a situation where something like that very similar is happening. When our economy was about the way it is before, when our economy, now I don't believe that the unemployment rate is as low as they say it is. There's more people working less hours. You know, full-time job used to be 40 hours a week. Now it's 32. So people are working less hours. Some people are working part-time jobs. They may be working 2 part-time jobs. So you've got situations like that where people, their wages are stagnant. Back historically, when unemployment was low, wages were growing at a rate of about 4%. They're growing closer to 2% now. College tuition is up. Groceries are up. Housing is going back up. Housing, kind of fell flat there for a few years, but it's going back up. Car prices are up. Don't need to tell you that medical costs are going up. Not only the medical costs, but also the insurance has gone up. I think I heard yesterday that since Obamacare came out, medical premiums, insurance premiums have gone up 22%. And of course, deductibles have gone from $1,000 or $1,500 a year to $6,000 a year. So the money that is available to us to do things that we would like, have that nice car, take the nice vacation, things like that, that money's not there anymore. And so things are getting tight, and people aren't able to keep up. It's a house of cards that's about to fall apart. I'm going to take a short break here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm sorry, I wasn't very well prepared, but we're going to take the break right now. Well, that's good. I had a little chance to wet my whistle and get a little bit of a drink. But back to the issue. We've got some things going on in this country that we're just not paying attention to, and I think we really need to pay attention. The banks were highly leveraged back in 2008, and this lady that wrote Fed Up, she was yelling and screaming and doing all she could to call people, call attention to people to pay attention, and she was, there was the naysayers, and there were the people that poo-pooed her and all like that. Well, then when everything happened just the way she warned, a few people kind of paid attention and began kind of listening to her. Well, she's kind of sounding the alarm again, because the problem we've got right now is that the banks are even more leveraged now than they were in 2008. They got all these bailouts. They learned nothing, and so there was no penalty for their bad behavior. That's like the kid that goes out and gets drunk and knocks his girlfriend up or or whatever like that, and then comes home and mom and dad buy him a new car and send him off to college. Well, his behavior did not cost him anything. His bad behavior had no penalty, and so you think he's going to change the behavior? Of course not. The banks are the exact same way. Some of these banks didn't want the bailout, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. All the banks took a bailout, but the bottom line is that some of them didn't want it and didn't need it, but they were told, you've got to take it, because they had for appearance's sake, needed to make it look like everybody had to have it. So we end up in this situation now where we've got things are the subprime mortgages. They're still doing that. They are still loaning houses, money to people to buy houses. That's too big a house for them, too much of a house for them, costs too much. They don't have enough invested in it, and we're getting back into that same problem again. The problem is we've now added cars to it. There's 5 months of weakness in a row in the car in the auto industry. Things are getting sluggish in the car in the auto industry. Delinquencies are increasing. You understand when you don't make the payment on your house, it takes a long time for them to do all the bank will send you the threatening letters and stuff like that, but in most cases it takes a number of months before they get around to actually doing anything, because they've got to go to court, they've got to do this and do that, and get all the stuff squared away so they can take your house. And then they've got to kick you out. And, like I said, that takes months. Car is a different thing. You understand, in the days of the repo guy that like hides in the bushes and waits for you to go to bed or whatever like that, and then comes and takes your car in the night, those days are gone, because these cars all have GPS and satellite links and stuff like that. And so the repo guy, all he's got to do is flip a switch and your car won't start. And then he picks it up when he feels like it, because he can turn the switch on and he can drive your car away. And that's happening. In the 2015 model year, those car loans are increasingly being taken. I don't have the numbers on it. I just know the numbers are going up. It's a scary thing, because there's a lot of money tied up there. You think, once again, not like a house. I mean, a house where people have, a few $100,000, tied up in a mortgage. This is a smaller number, but we also have to understand that more people have cars than have houses. Sometimes people have 2 and 3 cars. People have cars and make car payments that don't own a house. So there's a lot of cars out there, and so what happens when this starts dominoing and becoming a problem? Credit card balances are rising again. I mentioned that situation before, and the problem that's going on there, and how people are increasingly finding themselves in difficult situations. Restaurants are seeing a downhill slide. I know in our little community, it's about 35 miles away, because we live way out in the country. About 35 miles away, the town that we go to, I'm amazed at how many restaurants they have, because we don't eat out very often. And I look at how many restaurants there are, and there's a lot of restaurants. I'm going, how do they keep open? Well, some of them don't. There were 2 places that opened up in the last year and a half that have already closed. I like Five Guys Burgers, and I was kind of excited. Hey, Five Guys Burgers opened up, and I think I ate there one time, and it's already closed. There was a pizza place that opened up. I never ate at it. And maybe that's why they closed. If I'd gone to eat there, maybe they'd still be open. I doubt it. The bottom line is that that business is tough. I've got a cousin that her husband's in the restaurant business, and it's dog eat dog, and it's tough. The expenses are incredibly high by the time you pay your utilities and your help, and all the food and everything like that. You've got to run a lot of people through, and you've got to do a lot of sales to make just an average living. And so when you look around at all those restaurants that all have to share that piece of the pie, so to speak, it's little wonder that some of them are tough. And once again, when things get tough, what do? If things are a little bit tight, you cut back. And one of the things you cut back on is going out to eat. Maybe you don't go out, maybe you go out to eat the same amount of time, but instead of going to the restaurant, you do fast food, whatever. The bottom line is that people's behavior changes when things get a little bit tough. Brick and mortar businesses, we're seeing a lot of that. I mean, how many of those have we seen going out of business here fairly recently? And what's the reason for a lot of that is of course, changes in the way people shop. So many people shop online. They shop with Amazon or whatever. There's, and most retailers have an online store. I told my wife the other day, I thought it was interesting. Montgomery Ward's went out of business a number of years ago. Sears is just, I don't know if I guess it's still around, but it's not hardly. JCPenney's is going out. Those are all, when I was growing up, those are the ones that all had catalogs. I remember you got the Christmas catalog, you got the fall and winter catalog, and you got the spring and summer catalog. And I couldn't wait for those to come, and you'd look at them, and you'd shop in them, and you could order things, and in a couple of weeks you could drop the order in the mail. In a couple of weeks you'd have your stuff. It was really pretty cool. And so nowadays, I found it ironic the fact that these companies were sort of on the leading edge of the shop at home. And when I say leading edge, that's the way it'd been that way since the turn of the century. I mean, Sears and Montgomery Ward's catalogs go way, way, way back. And people were able to buy things at home and not have to drive to town. Well, that should have been an easy transition to online shopping. But they sort of lost their way, and things fell apart for them, and we see what happens. If you don't stay on top of the trends, you're going to be a dinosaur. We've just got we have a lot of things to think about. Once again, I like to go back to the bottom line is we've got to change ourselves. We've got to decide that we don't need some of these things. We've got to decide that maybe there's a tomorrow that we've got to worry about, and we can't rely on somebody else to do it for us. I hope that you'll take a little time to kind of look at your own life and decide. Maybe there's some changes that need to be made. Maybe my behavior online is a little bit lacking. Maybe the way we spend our money, the way we do things, and what our goals are, maybe are a little out of whack. And maybe we ought to think about getting back in line. God bless you, and I hope to talk to you next week.